Welcome to another episode of How Then Shall We Live. I'm Myron Milkey, and I'm joined again by our senior pastor, Matt Dumas.
Welcome.
How you doing today, Matt?
I am doing well. How are you, Myron?
I'm doing pretty good. So last time our topic was discipleship, and today we're going to have a special edition. This will be our first Q&A with Pastor Matt.
All right.
So a little recap. We started this podcast based on the conversations that we've had in the gym over the years, working out together. And I've had a number of Bible questions that I ask pretty much all the time. It seems that every week there's something I come up with. So we put out a call to the congregation and asked for a few questions for Pastor Matt dealing with the Bible. So I have some. That sound good?
Okay, sounds good.
So we're going into this cold.
Okay.
I haven't shared any of these questions with you, so you don't know what they are.
I don't.
Not beforehand. Previous weeks, we kind of discussed what we were going to talk about.
Right.
So these are all questions he hasn't heard yet, and so we're going cold. So right off the top of your head. So no preparation.
Okay.
Still sound good?
We'll see.
Okay, we'll see. So, and if you have a question on the Bible that you'd like Matt to answer, drop a comment down below or send us an email at connect@centralchristian.org. All right, let us begin. In Exodus 12:44, some had slaves. Deuteronomy 15:12 talks about Hebrew slaves. That's in 23:15 through 16.
Okay.
Where did the slaves come from?
You're talking about the slaves in Exodus?
Yes.
Would have been the Israelites. Is that what you're talking about?
It said that there were some. Should we look at the passage?
Well, let's take a look.
Let's take a look at the passage.
Let's take a look.
I'm
Exodus
giving
12:44.
you and then there's Deuteronomy 15:12 talks about Hebrew slaves.
Okay. So 12:44.
Yep.
We have. Okay, so and the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat of it, but every slave that is bought for money may eat of it after you have circumcised him." Okay, so that's the first one. And what was the second one?
Deuteronomy 15:12.
Deuteronomy 15:12. If your brother a Hebrew man or a Hebrew woman is sold to you, he shall serve you 6 years, and in the 7th year you shall let him go free from you. Okay.
And then also there's 23:15 and 16. Deuteronomy.
Okay, 23:15 and 16. You shall not give up to his master a slave who has escaped from his master to you. He shall dwell with you in your midst, in the place that he shall choose within one of your towns. Wherever it suits him, you shall not wrong him. Okay.
Okay. So, based on those three verses, sections, where did the slaves come from?
So during that time, most of the, as far as slavery was concerned, usually they came from conquered peoples. So when you're talking about the promised land as they went into the land of Canaan, right? Exodus are not there yet, Deuteronomy they're not there yet, but that a lot of times either they may be conquered peoples that they took in as slaves, or in the case of the Hebrews, it might be someone who became so poor that they couldn't support themselves. And so they sold themselves into slavery to become basically an indentured servant. When we think about slavery, we think of what happened in the Americas and in the colonies, and where you had one people group that was treated basically like animals. They were treated horribly. But when the Bible talks about it, it's a very different kind of institution. It's not one race seeing themselves as superior to another race. It is more of, again, a conquered people, or it was an indentured servant someone, because they didn't have the money to pay for life, they attached themselves to another who would provide for them for a time. And then usually, like he was talking about there, the year of Jubilee, the 7th year, then they would release the slaves that they'd taken in. But when they released them, they were never to release them without giving them a gift. And because they would, the Lord said through Moses, he said, for 6 years, you had the benefit of their help. And you basically pretty cheap labor. And so when you send them out, you always send them out blessing them. And again, when you think about the Old Testament even, and you think about even as they practice slavery, it's not apart from loving your neighbor. And it's not apart from when he talks about in the Ten Commandments, he'll talk about how you were slaves or you were foreigners in another land, so you were to treat the alien or the foreigner as you were treated, right? So, or not as the Egyptians did, but as you would want to be treated. And so it was always not with a heavy-handed, not a treating them as a less than person. It was treating them as a person who, that's the circumstance they're in. So probably the closest for us these days would be our whole work system, where you go to work for somebody, you have an employer, and the employer then has responsibility for paying you for the work that you do, and that's probably more similar than what you saw happening with the Americas.
Okay, well, thank you. That sums it up, because I think we see things in a different context,
right,
of based on what we know, what we've seen of history, and sometimes we're not really familiar with the culture of what was going on in Exodus at the time.
Right.
So.
And let me just say this though too, that wasn't the case with all ancient peoples as far as how you were supposed to treat them well. Because if you think about the Egyptians, how they treated the Hebrew slaves, they did treat them as forced labor, and they weren't super kind to the Hebrew slaves. But the Hebrews were to learn from that, and they were to treat their own slaves well. So.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think I have him warmed up now. So let's. Are you ready for another one?
Okay.
Okay. So this is based on Deuteronomy 28:63. Just as it pleased God to make you prosper, so it will please him to ruin you. Mm-hmm. So the question was pleased. So I think the question is, why would ruining someone please God?
So you're talking about, in Deuteronomy 28, you're looking at blessings and cursings. Mm-hmm. And so in that, well, here's the deal. God's way is the best way, right? And so when he was giving the law, he was giving it to people who were already in relationship with him. He already had a covenant with them. And he said that if you do what I tell you to do, then life is going to turn out well. You're going to be the head and not the tail. You're going to, 10 of you will chase away 100 and so forth. The sky will produce rain, your crops will grow, all those kind of things. If you live life according to God's rules. If, on the other hand, you choose to disobey God, if you choose to follow the other gods of the other nations, if you choose to do those things, you're going against what God has said anyway. And so God, the please is, we can see that as, oh, God's up there going, all right, I can't wait to bully him or whatever. But the reality is, it's the consequences of sin. And just as God would bless those who were obedient, he would also curse. He would bring the consequences for those. But in the law, those consequences, if you keep reading down, were always designed to bring them back. It was always designed for repentance. So it wasn't just punishment for the sake of punishment. It was punishment to change a heart. So you're a parent, right? Mm-hmm. You got kids?
I got kids.
And so when you discipline those kids, it's not just because you're angry. It's because you want to see the best for them.
Right.
And so you bring that discipline in order to show them there's consequences for their bad choices so that they make better choices next time. And really, you're trying to turn their heart back to you. So,
well, I think there's a theme on some of these because the ladies are doing a challenge of going through the reading through the Bible chronologically.
Right. Okay.
And so there's quite a few questions I think that are on the Exodus, Deuteronomy type thing. So this one I'm gonna skip ahead because it's again from Deuteronomy 28.
Okay.
And I think it probably is kind of the same answer, but one of the curses for not obeying to eat their own children They're asking, and it's again in 2 Kings, they do. So what's that all about? So I do have, it's Deuteronomy 28:53. Then you shall eat the offspring of your own body, the flesh of your sons and of your daughters from the Lord your God has given you during the siege and the distress by which your enemy will oppress you. So that's kind of a peculiar type verse if you look at it. I mean, just kind of.
So when you look at that, you have to say, okay, so is God saying, I'm going to make you do that? Or is that a consequence of what you've chosen? And so when you go to the 2 Kings passage, you're going to find that's a consequence. Okay. So because they had rejected God and they'd followed the gods of the lands, then God allowed the nations to come in. And as the nations were coming in and they were his instrument of discipline against his people, they would besiege the city. When they besieged the city, there was no longer food, right? So food runs out. And so what ends up happening is they get to the point to where they're willing to eat their kids because that's the only food source left. So it's a picture of desperation. And again, God doesn't want you to go that route. He's saying, if you reject me, this is, and again, let's back up here. Genesis, right? Genesis 1
I knew we were going to go back to Genesis at some point.
Yeah, you have God create a perfect world, right? In that perfect world, there's abundance, there's crops or the trees are producing the fruit they're supposed to, the ground's producing the crops it's supposed to. Everything works according to God's plan. Everything works perfectly just as it's supposed to. But when sin enters in, right, when Adam and Eve, when they listen to the lies of the serpent, they eat of the fruit, then God pronounces a curse not only on the serpent and not only on the woman, but also on man. And in that curse on the man, he says that there's a curse on the earth as well. So the earth would no longer yield its crops. And so from that point on, the what we call the fall, it impacts the whole creation. And so why do we have earthquakes? Why do we have thunderstorms? Why do we have forest fires? Why do we have tornadoes? Why do we have all of these what we call natural disasters? It's the groaning of an earth that has been cursed, right? That is no longer operating in the same way that God designed it to, the good earth. And so part of that is the way that you look at the way people treat people. So you start with Cain and Abel right after the garden, and you have your first murder. And by the time you get to Genesis 6, it says that the violence on the earth was so bad that God said, I'm gonna hit reset. I'm gonna send a flood and destroy the whole earth. And so that tendency in us, because of the fall and because we want to be our own gods and we want to do things our own way, is to always run away from him. And so when God's talking about the curses in Deuteronomy, he's saying these are the things that are going to happen because of your human nature now, your fallen nature. The folks that never knew me are going to live out that fallenness, and the violence that we saw before the flood is going to continue now in their descendants as they're oppressing God's people. And so that's kind of all wrapped up into that. And so the curses, it's not, again, like that, like God is just rubbing his hands going, I can't wait to do this to you guys. He's saying this is the natural consequence when you reject me, when you reject what's good and you embrace what's evil. This is what evil looks like.
Right. Okay. Yeah, I can't imagine getting to that point of desperation. And I don't think any of us can. Again, it's back to context,
right? What
we can relate to. And I don't think any of us have been to that point. If we think we're deprived, it's because we've run out of the certain flavor of a cereal that we like or something like that. Right. Okay, next one. Ready?
Okay.
All right. I know you know this one because I remember the explanation that you had. So we're going to go back to Genesis.
Okay.
Who are the sons of God that married the human females?
So, one of my favorite things, this is actually one of the passages that is a good illustration of this point. So when you're reading your Bible, you should never just parachute into one verse. And often what happens when we parachute into a verse is we begin then to fumble around and try to figure out what words mean. And so if I haven't read any of Genesis up to that point, and I just open my Bible to Genesis chapter 6, and I read about the sons of God and the daughters of men, all of a sudden I'm starting to think, oh, wait a minute, this must be angels and people, right? This explains where the demigods came from. This is where Hercules came from, or Persia, or was it what's the lightning thief dude?
Oh.
Percy Jackson.
Yes.
There you go. This is how all the demigods came into being, because they're the offsprings of angels and people. But if you read through the book of Genesis from the beginning, and you start so in chapter 4, they're out of the garden, right? So in 3 you have the fall. In 4 they're out of the garden. You have the story of Cain and Abel.
Right.
At the end of 4 you have the genealogy of Cain, and it starts talking about Cain's descendants. And there are some pretty wicked people in there, but this is Cain's descendants. It is interesting that one of his the daughters, you don't see a lot of women listed in his genealogy, but one of them, her name actually means beautiful. Let's see, what's her name? Her name was Nauma, I think. Yeah. So her name means beautiful. And then when you go to chapter 5, you have then the descendants of Seth, who replaces basically Abel. And so you have 2 lines there. And if you remember back from Genesis 3:15, God had said, He said, I'm going to put enmity, when He's cursing the serpent, He said, I'm going to put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed. And then it switches. He says, He will bruise you on the head and you'll bruise him on the heel. That's Genesis 3:15. We've talked about that a lot. But the descendants of the serpent and the descendants of the woman are what we're focusing on here. And so when you look at Cain and you look at the folks that came in Cain's line, they would be the descendants of the serpent, right? They're the ones who reject God. And then if you look at the godly line of Seth, because it says in chapter 5, they began to call upon the name of the Lord, right? With Seth's line. And so you have the godly line of Seth. Well, it can be confusing because when we say the seed of the woman, well, the woman was the one who ate of the fruit, and isn't that a problem and all that stuff? But what the woman was supposed to choose, right? So when he says seed of the woman, he's talking about the one who's going to come, who's going to make the right choice. And so there's the godly line, and then there's the ungodly line, the God rejectors. And that there would always be this enmity between the 2 lines, right? And so the first time you see that is Cain and Abel. So you see Cain who kills Abel because of a sacrifice, because Abel had brought the correct sacrifice. Then Cain's descendants, as you're going through there, again, lots of wicked people. They're the ones that began building cities, civilization, all those kind of things. The line of Seth then would be those who call upon the name of the Lord. And so what then you have in chapter 6, you have this violence that begins to increase. But it says that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful. Well, what you have then, you have the line of Cain that begins to intermarry with the line of Seth. And as they begin to intermarry, then those who call upon the name of the Lord are starting to disappear. Because you'd have to say, well, line of Seth, you have this line, but all of a sudden Noah's the only one left.
Okay. So it's been corrupted.
Why is he the only one left? Well, he's the only one left because the line's been corrupted. Okay. And so, and again, if you follow that out, the flood is not. We're not told the flood is because of angels. We're told the flood is because of the violence of men. And so, the judgment is on men. Now, a lot of folks then would go to 2 Peter and they'd say, well, what about the angels who didn't keep to their own abode? And what about in Jude, where it seems to talk about angels and men? And I would say that when you look at that, whatever they're talking about there, it's a judgment on angels, and those angels have been locked up in prison, right? And they've been locked up. If you fast forward when they go to the promised land, these Nephilim that you see in chapter 6 show up again. And you got the Nephilim that are in the land, and they talk about the giants, right? And you got Og, whose bed is 9 cubits long, and he's one of the remnants of the giants. Well, how did he get there if the angels are all locked up, the ones that were having babies with women?
So the sons of God are mentioned in Job. Is there a connection with the sons of God here and sons of God there?
So that's where it gets confusing. So folks will say, well, Job says sons of God, and Genesis says sons of God, so those must mean the same thing. But you have two different folks writing. And so you have, again, that's where context is important. And in the English language, if I were to say, okay, so Myron, what does trunk mean?
Trunk. Well, it's what an elephant's nose type of thing.
No, that's not what I'm talking about.
But that's what it means.
No, that's not what it means.
Okay, how about a suitcase or treasure chest?
That's not what I'm talking about.
But part of your car.
Okay,
back
that's
into
what
the
I'm
car.
talking
That's
about.
what okay.
So one word can have more than one meaning. So when you see sons of God, then you have to say, well, how is this author using it? And they may or may not be using it in the same way. And so you have two different authors, and clearly in Job, he's talking about angels when he says sons of God. And often the psalmist, when he talks about the sons of God or the sons of glory, then he may be talking about angels there. But in Genesis, you have to go back and you have to say, in context, what are we talking about that's going on here? So,
okay. Well, thank you. That was a pretty thorough explanation, I think. Thank you for joining us. Be sure to come back next week. And be sure to like, subscribe, and drop a comment down below.